Čaute. Ahoj, vítam vás na poradí druhom novembrovom meetupe Tatry IT community, tuto v coworking v Poprade. A ja začnem veľmi rýchlo, pretože nás čaká dnes veľmi pekná a možno, že aj dlhá sešna. Uvidíme, ako nám to pôjde. Ale poďme opäť prejsť cez pár tých základných vecí. Chcem privítať všetkých starých ľudí, ale nie vekom, ale tých, ktorí tu už boli aspoň raz, či to už sú seniori. A všetkých tých, ktorí tu sú prvýkrát, lebo vidím tu aj nejaké nové tváre. Vítajte, dúfam, že to nebude posledný krát, čo ste k nám prišli do Tatry IT community. Aj keď nie sme len IT komunita, a to stále opakujem dookola, pretože dnes nemáme čisto IT tému, ale máme design thinking. Je to téma, ktorá sa vôbec nedotýka iba IT, ale vlastne všetkého, čo je okolo nás. A ja si veľmi rád vypočujem túto tému dnes. Ale predtým pár organizačných vecí. Východy tuto vľavo a tieto veci to viete všetci. Ale poďme na drobnú vec. Ak máte slajdov, bojíte sa povedať nejakú otázku, tak hashtag Tatry IT je to, čo použijete a spýtate sa otázku. My to potom zorganizujeme a spýtame sa. Ale nebojte sa spýtať aj live počas celej prezentácie. Je to úplne v poriadku, máme mikrofón. Ak sa vám nepodarí povedať do mikrofónu tú otázku, tak ja potom poprosím Jonathana, aby ju zopakoval. My sme sa už dohodli. Robím to preto tak, aby všetci, aj tí, čo počúvajú live, alebo si to pozrú zo záznamu neskôr, aby jednoducho vedeli, o čom sa rozpráva. Je to potom také zvláštne na tej nahrávke, že nevieme, o čom sa kto rozpráva. Takže nezabudnite slajdo alebo mikrofón. Ja chcem poďakovať všetkým tak ako na začiatku. A ďalší event, teda posledný tohtoročný, a to už bude 5., odkedy sme začali v septembri znovu po letnej prestávke, bude 15. decembra a bude na veľmi zaujímavú tému. Máme už aj plagát a bude sa týkať implementácie Carbon Ever UI, so Samom, ktorý tu je, ktorý bude mať túto prednášku. O tom trošku sme si písali, že ako to preložiť. Ale jedná sa o to, akým spôsobom implementovať UI alebo nejakú aplikáciu, ktorá sa bude pozerať na to z pohľadu aktuálnej klimatickej krízy. Čiže ako sa to rieši, aké sú za tým rôzne procesy a na čo všetko treba myslieť. Takže ja sa teším na 15. decembra, predvianočný meetup so Samom a všetkých vás srdečne pozývam na toto stretnutie. Ak by ste sa s nami chceli skontaktovať, je to veľmi jednoduché, buď prídite sem, alebo sa prihláste na meetup. Máme LinkedIn grupu a máme aj Discord server. Samozrejme, môžete nám napísať aj na e-mail. Kedykoľvek nás pingnite, ak máte niečo, o čom by ste chceli vyrozprávať, alebo ak by ste chceli o niečom sa porozprávať s nami, bez toho, aby ste nejak možno boli verejne. Takže ja by som strašne rád privítal nášho dnešného hostia. Je to Jonathan. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Jonathan will speak English. Bude rozprávať po anglicky. Ak náhodou niekto nebude niečomu rozumieť, nebojte sa, my to skúsime preložiť. Prípadne, ak máte otázku, že niečo nie je jasné, pretože ten jazyk samozrejme nie je náš natívny. Jonathan vie trochu po slovensky.
Trošku.
Takže je to aj možno aj pre neho možnosť niečo vysvetliť po slovensky, alebo sa od nás naučiť, ako sa to povie po slovensky, ak by bol taký problém. Takže primárne bude prezentácia, alebo táto session po anglicky, ale vravím, sme tu všetci na to, aby sme si pomohli tomu všetkému porozumieť. A ja už nechám Jonathana sa predstaviť, povedať nám niečo o sebe a poďme rovno na vec. Jonathan, welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, that's great.
But you're local, Poprad,
yeah,
right?
Thank you. That's great.
Okay.
Good.
We'll switch your presentation.
Yeah, that would be great.
And you'll be fine. You can start with your introduction.
Yeah, that would be great. So, welcome everybody. Just a few things first of all. So if I'm speaking a little too fast in English, just tell me to slow down. That's completely fine. So, yeah. Good. So, as you know, anyway, the topic is going to be about design thinking. I just think before we start, it would be good to give you a bit of an introduction about myself, so you know who I am and where I've come from. So, basically, I work as a UX designer for a Swiss multinational company. Basically, the company deals with measurement devices for the aviation, auto, and maritime sector. And really a large part of my job is trying to develop software that is really intuitive for our customers to use. So our customers are very diverse. They're people from all over the world, mainly in the German-speaking market, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but also in other sectors too. So largely, you know, my job is very demanding. I also have to meet different people from different parts of the world that have a lot of usability issues. So I'm not sure how many of you really know a bit about UX design, or maybe a quick show of hands. Does anyone know about UX? Heard of it? Okay, so a little bit of knowledge. Okay. All right, so let's jump in. Okay. All right, before we get to the questions, maybe it would just be good for me just to give you a bit more of a background about how I sort of came to this topic and why design thinking is really an issue. So quite a lot of the times when I'm working in the job that I do currently, there's often a lot of problems that come up from different stakeholders, and these stakeholders often think about, well, how can we solve this problem? And there's a lot of ways we can do it. Sometimes we can go and speak to customers directly to try to understand the types of problems they're facing. Sometimes we can do maybe research from our competitors to see what they're doing. But quite often we turn to design thinking to really try and break down the problems a little bit more. So before we sort of dive into the topic as a whole, I want to just maybe think about all of you, because obviously there's a lot of new faces here tonight. I want to think a little bit maybe about your business, maybe the job you do currently. Okay, if you work for yourself or you work for a company, it doesn't matter. And just think about maybe a problem that you face. It can be any problem. It could be maybe a problem you face with interaction with customers. It can be a problem maybe you face maybe here in Poprad daily when you do things. Maybe it can be a service design issue when you go to the post office. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, think about a problem that you face daily just for a few minutes, and then we'll share some ideas. Okay, that wasn't a minute, that was about 30 seconds. Okay, so maybe, yeah, has anyone got anything that they find difficult or they face a problem? Anyone want to go first? It can be anything.
Using variety of messaging applications to write to any person that I know. I mean, I have WhatsApp, Messenger, and different kinds of applications, and I would prefer to use just a single one.
Why do you use many applications? Why is that?
Some person is missing in one social media, another person is on the other. So.
Yeah, I also experienced that problem as well. So in other words, you kind of like see something that would be like yeah, one social app or maybe messaging app, but for everything, essentially. Okay, yeah. All right, good. Anything else? Yeah.
Team management, so it's like ineffective meetings, you know, for 1 hour, and we do not come to any like real things done, you know. So it's so like just talking about, you know, some small talks, and because it's we are in different part of the, like everybody is in different country, so we only meet online, and it's very ineffective, you know. So we don't get things done. So
can you think of maybe some potential solution for how that could be better managed, or?
Maybe preparing some meeting agendas, because we don't have any agenda. Firstly, maybe set some rules that everybody has its own his or her own preparation before the meeting, so not that only this what needs to be discussed in team will be discussed, not that we will like solve everything in the meeting, that we have to make some preparation before, you know, so it's more effective, yeah. So.
Okay, great, yeah. All right, well, I'll move on, guys, quickly. So let's just give a quick overview of what design thinking really is. So really, what we need to, first of all, fundamentally know is what are the needs of the people, okay? What are the needs of our users, our customers, okay? There's a number of ways we can find this out, but we need to really get closer to the customer. And, you know, one thing now, we really live in the experience economy. So companies that don't listen to their customers, okay, they're not meeting with them, they're not talking to them, are really going to lose out, okay? So that's one thing they need to be thinking of. Also, what is basically possible within the realms of technology, so what are the tech limitations, and also the needs of the business as well. So that's really what design thinking encompasses. Basically, you need to think outside the box, okay? And thinking outside the box is really key to be able to be a design thinker. Now, with design thinking, a lot of people say, do you need to be a person who really is a designer already? No, not at all. You don't need to be a designer, okay, to do this. Anyone can apply the principles of design thinking. So I want to give you an example of really what design thinking is, something more concrete rather than just theory. But this was back in the 1970s. It's basically, you can probably see there's a truck which is stuck under a bridge. And this is quite a famous story, and I don't mind sharing this with you. So basically, in New York, I think it's in Brooklyn actually, this truck became lodged under a bridge. And it took ages for people to figure out what to do with it. So what do? Do we bring in teams of designers, architects, people to figure out how can we move this truck from this bridge? Okay, all these really clever people, okay, to think about what we can do about this problem. And do you know how it was solved? Just let's maybe take a minute. How was it solved, do you think?
Flat tire?
Sorry?
Flat tire?
Yeah, they took that. So that's exactly what they did. They released the air from the tires, and then they could drive it straight out. And the person that observed that wasn't an architect. It wasn't a designer. It wasn't a firefighter. It was basically a boy walking on the street. And that was it. And sometimes these simple solutions are often the key to what we can do to move forward. So that's a great example of design thinking. So let's just talk a little bit about what makes it so unique. So as I said before, design thinking is human-centered. So we need to speak to people, we need to speak to our customers, we need to get closer. It's creative as well. So within my job, I often sit in meetings, and typically there's people presenting a topic, maybe there's a theme, and a lot of people are quite quiet because they don't want to say something that they think would maybe upset the boss, or maybe it would be something that would be seen as unintelligent. But within design thinking, you're encouraged to be as creative as you want to get the ideas. So even if it's stupid, even if it's silly, you can filter down these ideas to maybe come with something that's more feasible. Collaborative, we work together with people. Design thinking can't really be done on its own. You need to work with people or small teams of people to do this as well. We need to iterate, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit as well when we talk about this word iterate and what that actually means. But typically when we iterate, we need to maybe think of when we've spoken to maybe our customers, we understand the problems they're facing, we need to maybe take a step back, think about a solution, but then go out and test it with our customers. So we can't just take, for example, one idea as being the solution, but we need to test it. So hands-on, of course, we're going to talk about that in a moment. We need to obviously prototype. We need to think about maybe coming up with a solution and testing it. And then we typically show but don't tell. So when I actually test an idea with a customer, I don't tell them what I'm thinking or the story, but I actually say, here is the prototype, you do it, you work with it, you tell me what is on your mind, you tell me where to go. And that's the way that then I realize if they understand the way I'm thinking or not. So that's a really key point as well. So this is actually how I spend my days. I spend my days drawing pretty pictures, basically, okay? But on a serious level, this is what I do. So I typically speak to my customers. I understand the problems they're facing. Based on that, I can start to draw some sketches, or we typically call them wireframes in UX design. We sometimes do this, I mean, every company does it differently. So basically, some people do what we call high fidelity wireframing, and they have very graphical, very detailed, clean UI. What we do in my company, we tend to be a little bit more basic, and we go for something more low fidelity, where we just sketch out something, and then we start to test it out like this with our customers. The reason why we do this primarily is it's raw, and it doesn't cost us much money, quite simply, because of course we can do this quite quickly. I can speak to a customer, I can change things quickly, update it again, test it again, and learn all the time. Learn and fail, really. So just a few things I'd like to clear up. So what really is it not? What is design thinking not? So basically, it's not just for creative people, it's for everybody to embrace and work with. It's basically not just brainstorming as well. I think also, you know, with design thinking, we need to understand that it's not something we can solve in one day. When I run design thinking workshops in my company, we typically spend an entire week doing it. So we come in, we spend one day understanding the problem, then we might go out, we might speak to our customers, so this might mean a lot of voice video calls, and then after we've had these calls, then we spend maybe one day prototyping, and then we test, okay? So it definitely does take some time to do it properly. It doesn't work for all problems. I mean, there might be some situations where design thinking wouldn't work, but I think it works probably best with digital products, maybe also to a degree service design issues as well. So that's just something to bear in mind, but I think on the whole it can work for a lot of people. Maybe it would just be really good for me as well, since we've got a few people here tonight, just to get an idea of the backgrounds of some of the people as well. So, I mean, have we got a lot of developers here tonight, or? Yeah, developer, okay. Product managers, product owners? Yeah, okay. Digital marketeers? No, okay, all right, okay. Okay, so just a couple of things about the impact. So obviously design thinking is used by really large companies. So Starbucks, Apple, Nike are to name but a few. Typically, when these companies have implemented design thinking, they've seen profitability go much higher. They've built better relationships with their customers. Now, this is all very abstract, but I'd like to get real and show you how I do it. And you can actually see how we approach it in my company, and it might give you some ideas about how you can approach it in your life, in your context. So I need to just ask Tomasz to click this link for me. Okay, Tomasz, if you could just go to the top. Yep, good. Okay, so as I told you all before, I work in the in a Swiss multinational where we are working on the development of software for measurement systems. And at the moment, I'm still, actually this is a huge project, so I'm still working on this project at the moment, but this is a software which has been in development for 20 years. Actually, it was first launched in the early 2000s. And if you look at it today, this version of software looks very, very old. It's very outdated. For anyone to use this software, you typically need to have at least 5 days of non-stop intensive training. So if you were to use it and come and look at it, you'd think, oh my God, this is Chinese. I can't use it. I can't work with it. So it's very, very difficult to use. So what we're now going through in our team is a way to sort of bring this into the 21st century. And with this software, we also want to market it to new customers as well. And these customers they don't have maybe such a high level of education that some of the people that work with this software do. So we realized that we need to make the software more intuitive, more user-friendly, and just clean it up, essentially. So what we decided to do, Thomas, if you could just scroll down, please, or Rado. Yeah, what we decided to do was actually go out and speak to our customers. Now, the interesting thing with this is a lot of our customers are not the most easy to get in contact with, because they're people that work in huge assembly halls in Germany. And we thought, well, okay, how can we really get to the people that use our products? Well, you know, we've got a lot of barriers to do this. So what we started to do is we started to speak to people internally. These were basically different levels of managers, also people that go and see the customers. So these are people we call basically systems administrators, and they go and see the customers directly. And from that, we got a lot of insights into some of the problems our customers are facing. But we went one step further, and we organized some visits ourselves to go to Germany to see how the customers are using the software. And the level of information we got was impressive, because we got to learn, of course, things that were working for them, working well, what they liked about the older software, but we also got to learn about a lot of their pains. And these pain points were many. Quite a lot of it related to database issues, but it was also related to usability issues as well. I won't go through all of the issues because there are too many, but we realized quite quickly that a lot of things connected to the features that we have on there needed to be brought up into the 21st century. And we also realized that basically the messaging and support on the system was really not helping our users get their jobs done. What was also really interesting is we found out that there were a couple of instances where people were using our software, but then they were having to do something else in order to progress. So for example, they'd use the software, they'd go and do another job on another piece of software, and then come back and then use our software again. So what we actually realized is, well, okay, there's a bit of a disconnect here. Maybe we need to build a solution in our software that will help our users actually achieve all the jobs that they need to do. So yeah, if you just go down a little bit, please, Rado. That's when we decided to use design thinking to solve this problem. So once we got all the research, me being a UX designer, I said, well, okay, it's probably my job to come up with a solution for this. But I thought, why do that when I've got some great people on my team? I've got developers, front-end developers with years of experience who know the product. I've got product managers, I've got engineers, I've got all these people with these great minds, so why not use that? So what I decided to do is, by the way, this is actually called the double diamond principle that we use in design thinking. So I decided to take a bit of time to get people to discover the problems our users were having. After that, we spent a bit of time synthesizing the results. So what I mean by synthesizing is we took time to filter what were maybe some of the most urgent problems for our users, and then we could distill maybe what would be secondary problems, and so on and so on. Once we had that, the idea or goal was to maybe make some small prototypes, some maybe user flows to understand what we could do to solve some of these problems, and then of course go back to our customers and test. So that's what we did. So again, Rado, if I could just ask you to go down. I gave my team about 1 week to review all of the results that we'd actually collected from our customers. So they had time to understand the problems and a lot of the different cases that we faced. Over about the course of 3 days, we managed to take time to look at the older software, why things weren't working, to also get some input on maybe some ideas I had. We just spent time discussing some assumptions as well and things that we needed to clarify. And then after that, we went into developing some solutions, something that you guys are going to work on tonight as well for me. So what did that mean basically? Well, I wanted all of the people to understand the problems and then working groups to come up with some kind of solution for how we could approach these problems. And this was something that was really, really messy because some people decided to code something, some people decided to do very messy drawings of, for example, user flows. And this was something I think that was really, really helpful for all of us to understand the different problems. So if you could just go down, right out. We had many different solutions based on the user flows that we were putting together. And then we also did some sketches. And then after we'd done this, we arrived at some final solutions that we thought were going to solve some of the problems we were looking at. So at this stage, once, maybe if you can stop here, Rado. At this stage, basically, once we had more high fidelity mocks, we then went out, prototyped these, and tested them with our users. And then this was a great source of learning. So with this learning, we could then go back, we could iterate, and we could change and make improvements, basically. Okay. So if you could just go back to the presentation. Okay, you can go one slide on. Okay, so I want to talk to you just a little bit about the benefits of doing this, and why do all that? Because that seems like an awful lot of work, really. Why do we need to spend that time with all these drawings and ideations? Well, quite frankly, it's a good way that we can build relationships with customers, because it's not just about finding out people's pains, but it's about finding new opportunities of ways to do things differently and maybe even better. And I think, quite frankly, that's what we should all be doing. I mean, especially myself as a UX designer, I'm always looking for new opportunities, maybe for business reasons, but also for reasons to help our users achieve their goals faster, okay? Things have to be more intuitive. I think today we live in an economy where if your product is not serving people within seconds, quite frankly, they'll go somewhere else and they'll get it done faster, maybe cheaper, maybe more efficiently. So definitely we need to think about improving these experiences. We also need to develop these customer relationships much more as well. This goes hand in hand with customer experience, service design, and we need to think about something called retention as well. So making sure that when we have a user, that they don't just come to our website maybe once and then leave, but they keep coming back. They keep staying with us, they become loyal, maybe they become customers for life as well. As I said, we can open up new business models, we can discover new opportunities, and we can reduce inefficiencies. So typically, if we think of a digital product, we might find that we have a product that has maybe a lot of features that's just not really helping people get to where they want to go fast enough or smartly enough. Okay, so I have a few case studies here, but to tell you the truth, these are more about like really big global companies that I don't want to really share with you tonight. So let's just say that with design thinking, really, as I said to you before, it's okay that we fail. It's okay that we make mistakes. We learn from this, and failing often is actually better than getting it right the first time. Okay, so playing around with these ideas is great. It has to be human, it has to be focused on people, and taking this time to understand our users is probably the most key thing, really. Okay. I think it's important to say that we need to get away from this mindset of traditional thinking as well. So typically, whenever we approach a problem, we always think about maybe our own assumptions, okay? What we think would be the best way to solve the problem. And this is something really that we need to step away from. So maybe just a quick question, but when you encounter a problem, do you ever think about how you can solve it? Sure. Okay. And have you ever, when you encounter this problem, do you think other people experience that problem?
Sure.
Okay. Do you think your solution to that problem might be the right solution? Okay. Well, I think it's important to say that we always need to validate that and always test it out with different people as well. Okay, so the design thinking attitude. So when we start, typically, and this is what I find as well when I first started to run a design thinking session, is people get very uncomfortable at the beginning because it's very, very messy. You know, there's all these ideas, all these assumptions, and a lot of people like focus and clarity, and it's very, very messy process to begin with. So we need to make sure that we understand that we need to go through this messy period to do it. And then once we get more clarity, once we've done this testing, it becomes more focused as well. So I'll skip this one. I just want to sort of come back to the double diamond as well. So yeah, I mean, design thinking, I hate to be the one that says, okay, there's a process you must follow, you have to stick to it strictly. You can deviate a little bit, but I think it's just always sort of useful keeping in mind that you do need to allow the time for research, understanding the problem. You do need the time to gather these insights together. How you do your research is really up to you. You might decide to speak to customers. You might decide to speak to people internally. There's no right or wrong way of doing this, but it's important that you understand that getting this research, whether it's maybe external, internal, is really critical, that you can get some insights and then kind of come up with some ideation as well. Of course, then we need to prototype, we need to iterate at this stage. So even when we come up with ideas, it's really important that when we start to prototype, that we come back, we ideate, we prototype, we test with our users. When we come back, you might have heard of the term, guys, A/B testing. Okay, so A/B testing as well. So this is typically something we also do in UX. So we might not just maybe have one idea, but we might have maybe 2, 3, we might have more. And then we test this with all of our customers, and then we try to work out what is the best solution to go forward. Okay, I've kind of talked a little bit about this anyway. So of course we need to make sure that we keep people, business and technology in mind as well. One of the challenges I face, I'm quite a big advocate for pushing things all sort of customer centricity and getting closer to the customer. But there's also going to be a lot of demands. Maybe if you work in an organization, business demands. So business might demand that you have certain features implemented into a product. That can sometimes be a challenge, because if you're listening to your customers and your customers are saying they don't want, for example, some of the things that business want, how do you get around that problem? That can be really challenging. So you've always got to make sure that when you speak to your customers or your users, you're getting as much quality data as you can to sort of argue to maybe people in business, maybe people higher up, what maybe is better for the customer, okay? Of course, there's always going to be some kind of level of compromise here, but I always try to get as much data as I can. Maybe it's some analytics, some kind of measurable data as well, to say that maybe, I don't know, 72% of our users prefer using this feature in this particular way. So I always try to make sure I have as many statistics as possible. There might be technology limitations as well. Maybe it might be a particular feature. It doesn't happen too often, but it might be a particular feature is proposed that might be too maybe science fiction, maybe not feasible. Maybe it's just more about the budget as well. So that's often the biggest problem that I face as well. So that's something to think about. In an ideal world, if you can get all of that right, you get a level of experience, you get a level of innovation, which is obviously the most desirable thing that we want to get. But yeah, maybe I can just finish with saying that, you know, business people don't need to just understand design is better, they need to become designers as well. So probably for those of you that work in organizations, one of the biggest problems you're going to face is actually convincing business managers, especially, why you need to be more customer-centered, why you need to do this. I face a lot of these pressures every day. So people say, well, Jonathan, you know, what really are the reasons for getting closer to our customers? There's a whole host of reasons, and you've just learnt that tonight, really, why we should do that. Quite frankly, if you're not listening to your customers, you're very likely to go out of business, you're very likely to be uninnovative, and ultimately that's going to have effect on market share as well. There's a lot of reasons for that.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You talk a lot about being customer-centric. Is there a threshold not to be too much customer-centric?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
because
yeah.
You talk a lot about being customer-centric. I think it's dangerous as well. How do you find the
balance?
The balance, yep.
Yeah. I think it's important to be close to the customers. But in terms of like finding a balance, of course, there's things that are more measurable. So I try to get as much data as I can to understand maybe what is relevant for us to maybe make changes to within our software. But I think maybe, you know, it's important to just step back a little bit and think maybe what would be the impact if we wouldn't do things for our customers this way, right? So yeah, I mean, I get your point, Rado, about this, but you know, we need to think about, if I wouldn't do this for the customers, where would we lose?
Okay, so it's like the reverse question.
Yeah.
In the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and then there is the other side. We have a product, and the customers are asking for a very specific thing, which might hurt your business. Maybe. How do you identify that thing?
That's a really good question. So I think if you feel it could, hurt your business in a way, I think you've kind of got to, I haven't really ever had that type of, let's say, experience, but it's more likely, it's good to balance out what the customer says to you, and then try to think maybe more about what would be the long-term impact of that. Okay. So if you'd implement it. Let's say,
because there can be, if you have a product or something very specific, and then you have your product supports many use cases, then there are more niche use cases which might have very strong push from some client's business because they want to like invest money. But you know that in long term that wouldn't be maybe the best thing for the rest of the use cases. So we invest in part of the application, but then the rest of the application hurts. Even you get the income in the beginning, but then from the long term, this is really difficult to figure out. But this is not only from user's perspective, but the company's perspective, like what's the long-term goal, right? And in your experience, did the company had to rethink the long-term goal because of the initial thinking of the first diamond? Did you experience that they had to really think about, before any prototyping, even prototyping, think about their long-term goal? It
hasn't happened to me personally, but I do know of people who it has happened to. So I think that, you know, it's really important to be aligned with what the business needs are, and also what the customer needs are. So that's kind of what I was talking about before. So, you know, where does the company want to be maybe in 3, 4, 5 years with this? And then sort of, in a way, there has to be an element where like, particularly me as a designer, I need to maybe predict, you know, where we can be. And if we would maybe listen to every customer need, I'm not saying that we should listen to every single need, because otherwise it turns into a wish list of features which we want to avoid. But we need to think about what is really relevant from these points that they're talking about. What would obviously have a positive impact, and what would obviously have a negative impact if we were to implement this particular feature or maybe this wish.
Okay, and the follow-up thing is, for me, you as a person or as a subject which does the design thinking for the company, how to handle communication when you figure out that, okay, this is not as easy as just a few features and implement this or that, but how, when you figure out, or the subject who does the thinking, that it does affect the long-term company goals. How this communication goes, because this can get really complex in the end, because you need to reach higher and higher maybe. How does this influence the work then back?
Probably don't quite follow your question, Rado.
How did you experience this kind of problem that you had to stop working and communicate this somewhere else to higher management or to someone who needs to make the decision before you can continue in thinking like what should be the focus?
Yeah. Okay, so I think maybe we could just step back a little bit. So typically whenever we implement design thinking, we always implement, particularly my organization, we always implement around maybe a particular feature or maybe a particular problem that we're facing. So it's not like maybe a global high-level thing that we're doing. So it's always based around maybe a particular set of features.
Yeah, okay. So I most likely had in mind something like bigger company which with global impact. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. So when we work maybe more based around features, and then we're trying to understand how these features, maybe if they wouldn't work, obviously, what kind of problem would that cause? But then, of course, we need to think more about if we implement these features, we need to understand the problem, and then, of course, we need to think about the best way to, solve that problem, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah, exactly. So. Maybe we've got a bit of I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but maybe we've got some space for a few questions. If anyone has any, I'd be really delighted to answer any of your concerns, because I've been speaking for like the past 45 minutes. So if you've got any questions, I'm happy to. We will take a break, just to note, for maybe 10-15 minutes. And then I actually have an exercise that I'd like you guys to work on for me that relates to design thinking, just so that you have a bit of practical knowledge about how to implement it. And I'd be really interested to see what you come up with to solve some problems that maybe you face as well. So, yeah, we've got some time.
Jonathan, I have a question for you. I wrote it in the slide, but maybe I can ask you that directly.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in how much time does it take you to acquire the domain knowledge when you start working on the project, because you said that it's really about coming with the prototypes rather quickly than just to think about things, for a lot of time. So how is it related to really understand the needs of the customer, but also trying to solve the solution in a quickly manner?
Yeah. So it's also a really valid question. So within my company, the domain knowledge was something that I've kind of acquired, over quite some time. Typically, it's something that's always like we have a lot of training sessions anyway, so I always get this level of knowledge that I need. We're trying to, we work within scaled agile, so basically we tend to do things within sprint cycles, but the way that we work is I kind of back plan a little bit within scaled agile, and I allow a little bit more time. So if I know I want to run a design thinking workshop based on a particular set of features, I typically always plan maybe 2 or 3 sprints in advance. So that gives me time to acquire any specific knowledge I need to know. It also gives me time to run these sessions as well and involve the team. As you already saw, I need time maybe to speak to customers and plan these customer interviews. And then once I've acquired all this information, then time to actually speak to my team, give them a chance to digest the feedback. And then after we've got that, then we can start to think about maybe how we could ideate some of the challenges. Now, as I said earlier, just maybe this is also an important point as well. I'm not saying design thinking should be done for everything, but if it's something that is particularly maybe challenging, and I feel that maybe certain people in my team have good insights into these features that we're talking about, that's why I think it's a really good idea to involve everybody, because then it's inclusive and you get so many more feedback, let's say, points of view, essentially. So yeah, that's to answer your question. That's how we do it. I tend to back plan. I tend to also educate myself on the domain knowledge, because we also work across many different measurement devices. Some of them I've not encountered before as well. So it takes me time to educate myself. And I also do it a little bit privately as well. I have some private projects that I do, and these are completely unrelated to measurement devices as well. So it's also quite a lot of learning for me. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Do you have any favorite use case you would use to explain, using the use case to a 5-year-old? What is UX management?
To a 5-year-old?
Yeah.
Now you're talking.
I mean, because this is sometimes the user...
Yeah, that's a good question.
A good story would be the best, but what would attract children to start thinking about?
Yeah, it's now you've really put me on the spot now. So I'm thinking. Well, I think when you know basically kids obviously have challenges, but they always somehow tend to find a way to kind of overcome them, don't they? If you think about it. So of course, if a child's building some blocks and they fall down, then they might maybe construct them in a slightly different way. But they don't spend, if you think about it, they don't spend ages debating how we could do it. They often just try and work it out. And then, okay, if it fails, we try again. And I think actually, I can see where you're going with the questions. So I think that's the important thing here, that as adults, we all have egos. Yeah, we do. We want to feel important. We want to feel that we're intelligent, and of course that we're not upsetting anyone by saying, okay, it should be done like this because this other person has a completely different point of view. The whole idea of design thinking is that you're free to cast away maybe these stupid, crazy ideas, but it's maybe one of those crazy ideas that works. Because if we look at maybe great innovators over the years, you know, if we talk about people like Steve Jobs, maybe all these visionaries like Jeff Bezos, they probably have all started off with really crazy ideas, but yet they've come and they've created something of worth, of value, really. So maybe I've gone completely off the point there, Rado, but hopefully...
I think you made it because it was the thing that in the beginning that you can think out of the box. And you mentioned that they actually do. Not even think what they think about, they just do. And this was one of the things how you explained. So you actually nicely turn it around, which I really like.
Okay.
So doesn't mean that we should not learn from them, but we should just think like, hey, why not try something different? Yeah,
definitely. Maybe because I'd just be really curious to know actually. How many of you have maybe had a situation where you could have used design thinking, but you didn't use it for whatever reason? It doesn't matter, but maybe you could have used it to solve a particular problem. And maybe if you could tell me about that problem that you had.
I think that you have to use it all the time. How you can make something without directly just place it somewhere. Oh, sorry. But I got also a question, if I got the mic. So, when you make some kind of platform, let's say, you made the first design, then go to iterate it with the client. How do you know when it's the final project? Like when your client is like, he always says it's great, but you know it can be done better. How you know when it's the last one iterate?
So I think with that, it's not the point of someone telling you it's great, because that really means nothing. You know, it's typically probably you guys have heard of something called the mum test. Have you heard of this, the mum test? So basically the whole idea is that, you know, you have an idea, you go and show your mum, and you say, Mum, what do you think? And naturally your mum will say, it's great. Why? Because she's your mum, and she doesn't want to disappoint you. But you know, customers, people that know you, maybe customers that know you, they also don't want to disappoint you. But people that don't know you will tell you exactly, it's either, sorry for the language, but it's really shit, or it's maybe good. So I think, you know, the way I make that decision is that I often sort of go to the customer and I say, show me, I'm not going to tell you anything. Show me how you use it. And I already know in my mind what I want them to do. I just say, do this, do that, but I don't tell them anything. The only time that I ever really maybe intervene with a customer is if I can see they're having a problem. And they might be hesitating on a particular button or whatever it is, and then I might say, what are you thinking? Tell me. And then they might say, well, I'm thinking if I go here, it will take me to here, or if I go there, it will take me to there. And then I'll quite quickly know if my design is working or not. So when I can get through a session, maybe a user testing session with a user, and I can actually see that they can go from maybe 1 to 10 without really me having to say anything, I'll know then that the design is working. If there's a lot of maybe parts where the user has to pause, maybe I have to jump in, explain something, then clearly more work needs to be done, basically. So that's how I make that decision, really. I mean, the goal is to kind of get it 99% right. It doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be to something where you feel comfortable. You kind of also have to know it as well, that you can kind of present that to stakeholders. You've shared it with your customers. You know you've got the best insights possible. Then you've done your job, basically. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
Let's say you have a lot of skills as a UX designer, and you know people, and let's say you have a situation where you are tempted to jump over the research because you know people, you know these patterns, like people behave, what might be the problems. And my question is, if you sometimes just have temptation to jump over this and to save some time, let's say, or if it, or is it for you, I have to research, I have to ask those people, I cannot jump over it. So what's your day-to-day experience in this?
Yeah, it's also a really good question, actually. I think it's a very valid one because typically, I don't want to say I do it, but if it's maybe something that I know, and I know that, for example, those particular customers I'll probably interview again or meet again about maybe not the same, but a similar feature, maybe there's elements of the research where maybe I would not need to go over that again with that particular customer because maybe it's already known to me. Yes, of course, I'm guilty. Guilty as charged, I sometimes do it. But when I have doubts, when I feel maybe that I need to maybe know a little bit more, it's really wise for me to go deeper. And this can sometimes be a little bit difficult because trying to explain that to stakeholders on the team that, look, I need a bit more time, maybe a product owner, because he has a budget as well. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to say, look, I need a bit more time to go deeper with this. But if it's necessary to the outcome of the project, of the product, I really do push for this. So yeah, it's a good point because it can happen in terms of you know, sort of similar information. But yeah, I think really again, if I've got doubts, I definitely do sort of go deeper. So I hope it's not too general an answer for you, but that's how I approach it anyway.
That's the second question coming to my mind.
Yeah.
If you ever
Have experienced some real big mess from based on your decisions, like that you were wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm never wrong. No. I think, yeah, I mean, earlier in my career, I did, yeah, of course I did. I was, let's say, a younger designer, I didn't know, and I definitely made mistakes, but, you know, mistakes make you stronger. This is, I think, a core principle of UX, that we have to fail in order to learn and to grow. And when, I think, particularly with this project, I'm tending to always sort of double check maybe assumptions, because one thing we do as human beings is we make assumptions about everything, that, okay, it will be like this because, okay, or we should do it like this because. And I try to avoid that, even though it's a real, let's say it's a human thing to do this. I really try to just get validity on what I'm doing by always sort of like, I don't just have to speak to customers, I can speak to maybe people that have a lot of knowledge about the product. So maybe to quote a more relevant example for you, I was working on a couple of features a few days ago, and these were features where a user would have to maybe insert some numbers into the software, and they'd have to use a tool to validate these numbers to check if they were correct, basically. It's a long story, but essentially that's what the user would have to do. And I could have said, okay, I'll go and test this with a user, but what I actually then did beforehand is I actually spoke to the calibration guys in our German office, and I said, look, this is a solution I'm thinking about that could work. You guys know very intimately how this works. What do you think about my solution? So again, I showed them, they had a clickable prototype, they worked for it, and they kind of came back to me with their points of view and feedback, and I knew that without even going to a customer, first of all, that if I was kind of on the right track or not. So this kind of prevented any mistakes and miscommunication, because, you know, I'm not an expert in all of these tools, I can't possibly know that. But the more that I can sort of like speak to people that do know it, that do have this academic background, all of this knowledge, the more that then I can actually design something that is sound within the reasoning of the software, of the technology, but also then once I go and test it with a customer, I know that it's probably also, I wouldn't look like an idiot in front of the customer, like the customer would say, hey, why are you showing me this rubbish? You know, it doesn't fulfill what I need it to do. So I think that's how I sort of mitigate these potential screw-ups, basically. So yeah. Okay.
You mentioned a lot of fail. Yeah. How do you incorporate that fail, but not because you know that fail is a progress, but the customer or the client might not really understand that fail is okay, or the boss of them, or maybe maybe not in your company or your team, because they know how it works, but maybe in smaller teams when they have a freshly hired UX designer, and then they come up, oh, we failed 20 times, and the boss like, oh, okay, so what is success? If you told me like, hey, you failed 20 times, so how do you get about it? How do you maybe change the narrative of the fail? Do you use progress or do you use something else? How to explain that to different parties in the process of design thinking?
Yeah, I think that's sort of probably what you're getting at, Rado, if I understand correctly, is that some people probably perceive failure as a negative, and maybe a question of competence as well. So I think, you know, that's the thing, that you have to do as much maybe research, maybe as much background information as you can about the particular problem. That's why when I spoke before, I gave people the chance to review the research so that they had this knowledge as well. And the more knowledge, I mean, knowledge is power, right? So the more knowledge you have, essentially, the more informed you are to maybe solve a particular problem or challenge. It doesn't mean you have to be right, but it just means you've got as much information as you can. And what I always encourage is that when people have this research, that they go back, they can check it. The research is always there, it's never going to die. It's always there that people can review it and check it again. Even I have to, because I'm only human. I can't remember everything that people told me 2 days ago. And I think that by having that, when you can actually then start to implement that research into solutions, and if maybe you try a particular solution, it doesn't work out, then go back and check the research. It doesn't mean you've screwed up entirely, it just means maybe there was something missing that you overlooked. And then you can go back, and often I find as well, I mean, probably you guys as well, that you have those aha moments, don't you? And, you know, I've been in the shower, and like, for example, I've maybe tested something with a customer, and I thought, that didn't really go well, that didn't really work out. And then I can be in the shower, and then I can think, aha, that's why. I missed this vital piece of research out that would help the user solve this particular problem. And that's how I've typically sort of got over this issue, really. So, yeah, fail fast, fail often, but then you learn. Okay? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any difference from your point of view when you start like on a green field with a blank page against the situation that product is there and you need to implement new features?
Yeah, so I think there's a big difference, basically. So when you have an existing product, so maybe just talking about the case that I have here, with this existing product, there were a lot of problems that we needed to solve, and design thinking led itself well to this. With a greenfield project, and you're kind of creating something from new, it maybe depends on the scope of that project. So are you creating something that maybe is a completely radically new idea, or are you are you building something that is maybe new for you, but maybe exists in some other context? So maybe it could be, let's say, for an example, another e-shop. So the way that you're going to do your research will be completely different. So if you are going to start a greenfield project and it's something that's very new, you might want to spend time maybe understanding the problems that maybe people have for that particular thing that you want to solve. So that, of course, means that you need to maybe, you don't really have any customers, essentially. You don't have any, let's say, users, but you need to maybe think very differently about how you approach that research. So that's completely different to maybe the experience I've had, where we have designated users, people we can speak to. But you know, again, it really depends on the context of who you want to solve for. So I think if it's something new, you need to determine to think about how that particular maybe project that you have would maybe solve problems for a particular group of people. You'd need to maybe segment and think about the type of people you want to solve that problem for, really. So yeah, I hope, again, that's not too general an answer, because that's not really my experience of working on greenfield projects, I have to say, but you know, that's how I would approach it if it were me. Okay. Any more questions?
I'm curious. In your particular line of work, oh, thank you. But I didn't know how to sing. Anyway, in your particular line of work, do you make some video recordings of how the software is being used to have some reference you can go back to?
Yes, we do. So we always record it, basically, because. So how I do it, so typically within my work, there's two stages where I have an interaction with the customer. So this can be a user interview, where I get to know about it's kind of like the discovery phase. I get to know the problems or challenges they're facing. And then the next part is typically user testing, where we go, as you said, with the physical product, and we might do we record the screen, and then of course we get an idea of how the customer works for a particular problem. So yeah, we have that. We can look back on it. Before COVID, we did a lot of in-person interviews, so we didn't record it, and this typically was very different, because I would sit with a person physically, I'd ask the questions, I'd have another person next to me, typically a UX researcher, who would also make notes, and then we'd get together afterwards and we'd synchronize all these results. Typically we used to just share this on a Google document, and then this would be distributed to the team. But now, of course, COVID came, we can do everything online, and we record all of our footage, and we also share it with the team as well. So yeah, that's how we do it.
You didn't just interview, but actually how the user is using your user interface in whatever device he's using it at.
Yeah, we do that as well. So also we need to think about like cross-platform as well. So, you know, for example, different use cases. A lot of the software we do, it's going to be used in a touchscreen environment. So we also want to test, you know, touchscreen versus conventional desktop as well. So we also sort of measure that as well. One thing we do, which is probably just going a little bit away from your question, is we also do like a lot of analytics as well. So we're also measuring, for example, how many times people maybe click back, or maybe they're struggling on a certain feature, why is that hesitation, and so on. And then when we discovered certain things within our analytics, we might just then go and speak to our customers and say, okay, so we were reviewing this video, we noticed this was a particular problem, maybe could you just walk us through it, how would you solve it? And then we can go a little bit deeper and solve general usability issues. So I think it's quite important to say that, with a digital product, the work's kind of never done, because we always have to go back and we always have to speak and then think about how we can maybe tweak and improve it based on the analytics results that we get as well. So it's a big process.
Do you also ask them to make some commentary as they are using the product?
Definitely. So a big part of speaking to the user is not just say, okay, sit there quietly and click through the screen and tell me, okay, I'm going to click this button and this goes here, but it's also about getting them to voice what they're thinking, the emotions that they feel, how they feel about maybe the interface, what they're missing, what they're lacking, what's misleading for them. Essentially, we're looking for pain points, but we're looking for opportunities as well. So, as I said to you earlier in the presentation, when people have these, maybe these moments where they hesitate, we also often find that maybe there's something that we've not considered that might actually help them. So you might have maybe a particular feature or maybe a list of features. Maybe these actually aren't helpful for the user, and actually it's causing them to hesitate because they're confused. So this is a great opportunity for us to discover maybe ways that we can just not improve it for the lives of our user, but also how we can maybe spot new opportunities to develop with the software.
Are you also using some tools like Hotjar?
Yes, yeah. So we track obviously sort of where people are clicking on the screen, monitor as well. So yeah, we do. Yeah, we tend to make more use of Google Analytics, I must say. So we have used Hotjar, but Google Analytics is typically what we track. But it's actually getting harder for us, and I'm glad you asked that question. It's getting a lot harder for us because we have another challenge now, and that is basically, how can I best describe it? But basically, the user has our software typically loaded onto a desktop or a laptop, but then they have a physical unit underneath. And a lot of these devices are not connected to the internet. So that makes it really hard to track the statistics of what the user's doing. So this is again why kind of the, let's say, the old-fashioned way of going and speaking to the customer, seeing how they work with it works. We do have a lot of software that is also connected to the internet where people have them on iPads, things like this, so it can work. But in some cases where we have, these people that are using the standalone devices, it can be really hard to get analytics. I mean, if any of you have got any ideas, I would be really interested to talk to you about this, because it's a challenge for us at the moment, really. So yeah.
Do you have any, maybe in the whole process, how much time do you spend in research? How much time prototyping? How much time maybe something else? Is there any general rule you want to keep so you are on top of the process, or is it just, or depends on project or problem?
Yeah, of course. Of course, it's very specific. It's specific to the project. As I said, we work within Scared Agile, so we typically work within sprint cycles, so we have to sort of adhere to this. However, every project's different. Some projects get, I would say, although they follow Scared Agile, they typically, their release cycles are not as frequent, so we have a little bit more time to play with. But it's very hard to give you an answer really of like just how quickly we do it, because every company works differently. And I worked my previous job, we had much more time, we had weeks to do it. For example, now maybe it's like I might have a week to do the research, maybe in some cases days as well. So it's so individual really. I'm sorry I can't answer the question more clearly, but that's how we do it. Yeah,
it is sort of what I expected, but
yeah.
I thought maybe the process itself has some kind of rules you could or should follow. But yeah, I can imagine that it depends on every single project.
It does, because there's a lot of stakeholders involved, but I mean, typically, I think I mentioned it earlier with, it's not a one-day process. It's definitely something that I think can be pushed into a week, but it depends so much on the scope of what you're trying to solve, the problems you're trying to solve.
And maybe for me, one last time, do you sometimes go for a quick win something? Because you know that you can fix things which will improve and then will give you maybe more time or some happiness everywhere, or, do you go for quick wins?
So quick fixes. I think a lot of the stakeholders would like that. I think that's something that, but if you want to sort of take that approach, and it's very tempting to, it's always something that just needs to be validated, I think, before you do it, So that's why, again, it's something I push for. I mean, it depends very much individual on the quick win you're talking about. What I always try to do, so maybe as a UX professional, one of the things that I make use of is just my knowledge of what I think would work. So obviously there's some best practices that you can follow, and probably, I'm probably sure most of you have heard of Nielsen Norman. So basically Nielsen Norman are the, let's say, leading UX research organization in the world. And I do sort of try to follow a lot of that. Obviously I'm listening to a lot of podcasts, following, let's say, some UI practices and things like that. And in some cases maybe a quick win might apply, but I always tend to really go through the process of vetting it, speaking to people, really testing it, understanding, and then learning from it. So I think you just got to be careful with quick wins. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that you need to be careful of it.
Yeah,
really.
okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Good. I already see we're kind of like moving on with time. So look, I've got a little task. So we'll have a break beforehand. But basically, I'd like to get you into some groups, 4 or 5 people per group, and I'd like you to use design thinking to solve a problem. So in your group, think of a problem. Obviously some of you might have more problems, but just try to keep it to one and try to follow the steps that we've talked about. So try to maybe just understand the users for whom you are trying to solve that problem. You might want to build a persona of your ideal user. So typically it might be maybe a certain demographic, a certain type of person. It doesn't matter who it is. It could maybe be a business person. It could maybe be a local person here in Poprad, okay? So think about the demographics. Think about their needs, problems, and challenges for the particular problem that you're trying to solve. I know you don't have the answers for this because you don't have the research, obviously, but just maybe try to think a little bit about it tonight. What could be their needs, problems, and challenges, and then start to think about a potential solution. I don't mind seeing maybe 1 or 2 solutions. Think about maybe how you could solve them. You might want to draw a user flow of maybe how that person would maybe meet your product or service, and then how they might, for example, want to work through that. And then after that, maybe a prototype as well. I realize tonight you don't have time to test it. You're not going to be able to test it on real users, unfortunately. Maybe you could test it on other groups. I'm open to that as well, if you want to. And the idea is that after that, we could just have a little presentation with your concepts as well. So we have a bit of a practical challenge tonight. Okay, so I'm aware we don't have too much time. I suggest we just maybe have a break for 10 minutes, have some water or a coffee, and then we can come back and work on it. Okay, any questions?
We'll answer all the questions, but I want to thank you, Jonathan, officially for the very first part, because we won't be, streaming the practical part. So this is even for you optional, but I strongly suggest you to stay here because there can be some ideas and learning process. We'll continue after the break, and I would like to see you on YouTube. In December. So after the break, we continue, and goodbye YouTube. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Voda je vzadu, káva je vzadu, nejaké pivo.